Hello everybody and welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing a review of M.L. Spencer's standalone epic fantasy novel, Dragon Mage. So this is a book that I had seen Patrick talk about over on his YouTube channel. And because there are not a lot of epic fantasy standalones, I thought that it would be nice to give it a try. It was on my list of 21 novels to read in 2021 and one of the new releases for this year that I was really hoping to get to. So the way that I'm going to format the review today is just give you a little bit of an overview about the book, discuss some of the elements of the book and whether or not they worked for me or didn't really work for me, and then give an overall impression at the end. This will be a completely spoiler-free review, so if you haven't read the book, maybe some of the points herein will help you decide whether or not it is the right read for you. So just to give you some context or some setup, Dragon Mage takes place in a land that has been rent apart by a cataclysmic event. So this event, called the Sundering, which has happened, long ago in the past, has split the world into two areas. The world above, which is slowly being depleted of its magic, and the world below, which is full of magic. So we are following a young boy, really two young boys, who live in the world above. And their names are Aramon Wraith, or Aram, and Marcus Gallier. And these two boys live together in a small fishing village. They kind of have separate lives, and circumstances in the first couple of chapters bring them in close contact with each other, and a tentative friendship starts to bloom. After their friendship starts to develop, a traveling bard comes to town, and this bard causes a lot of excitement because this is a small town where really nothing ever happens, and he is there to pick an apprentice. And people are not quite sure what he's looking for in an apprentice or who he's going to select, but there are a lot of young boys and young girls who are really excited at the prospect of being able to leave this small town and go out and discover the world. Marcus, in particular, who has a really difficult home life, is hoping to be chosen by this bard to be his apprentice and to be able to finally leave his home and away from the life that he really detests. Aram, on the other hand, is really content in the village that he lives in, and he wants to grow up to be a fisherman, so he doesn't want to be selected by the bard. But Aram is also very lonely, and he sees someone in Marcus who could be a potential friend. So he decides that he's going to help Marcus become selected by this bard. And he tells Marcus that the way that he can help him with this is through the use of magic. And this is all very basic setup. So we get the impression that Aram potentially is able to use magic, which is, as I said, a very rare occurrence in the world above. And we have Marcus, who is kind of skeptical and unsure if Aram is actually able to do what he says, or if, because he seems to be a little bit strange, a little bit different from everyone else around, if this is something that he just believes that he can do. So this is the premise or the catalyst that kind of propels the story forward and starts the framework through which we see this grand epic fantasy unfold. The first thing that I want to touch on when I talk about Dragon Mage is the prose. So I know not everybody cares about prose when reading fantasy. Some people enjoy really flowery writing, some people enjoy really utilitarian, straightforward writing that just serves as a vehicle for the plot to advance. I am okay with lots of different styles. I do prefer writing that is a bit more complex, but it certainly doesn't deter me if it isn't. I did find the prose style in Dragon Mage very difficult to adjust to. It was a very simple, straightforward prose, which hopefully will make it accessible for a lot of readers. But I also felt like there was a lot of telling, rather than showing. We'll be introduced to a character and they'll kind of have this aside or this thought where they think, I'm gonna do this because I'm a good person, or I'm gonna do this because I'm evil and I can't really help myself. And instead of reflecting the character's values and their morals through their actions, we get a lot of this kind of info dumping through their thought processes. And that for me can be really jarring. I like to discover characters' motivations through how they interact with other people and less through the prose and less through the narrator or the author telling me what the character thinks. This is a very personal preference. If you are someone who doesn't mind that kind of style, then I don't think that this would be a huge deterrent for you. But it was definitely an adjustment for me, and I felt like it took until I got about a third to maybe even like halfway throughout the book before I could effectively kind of block that out and just enjoy the other elements of the story that were really working for me. The element of the story that I usually enjoy the most are the characters. So whether or not I enjoy the writing style, if there are good, strong characters, that's something that can really save a story for me. And here in Dragon Mage, I was a little bit torn on the characters themselves. So I'll focus on Aram first because he really is our primary protagonist. The book does switch back and forth between Aram's perspective and Marcus's perspective, but I feel like Aram is our main protagonist, if you will. So in Aram, M.L. Spencer has given us a character who is neurodivergent, which is really great representation. Aram has symptoms that are consistent with autism spectrum disorder. He frequently talks about some of the challenges that he has with social interactions, some of the difficulties he has with different sensory activities, different sensations on his skin. He talks about his fastidiousness. He talks about his need to keep things perfectly symmetrical. And I thought that those were all really true to life. In my medical practice, I see a lot of patients with autism spectrum disorder. That is one of the main areas of focus for my practice. And I thought it was really, really nice to see positive representation of something that we don't see a lot in epic fantasy. In my mind, I kept drawing a parallel to the Percy Jackson books, where Rick Riordan took the concept of having ADHD and these kids who were classically categorized as disruptive or hyperactive and made that into one of their strengths and gave that a backstory and a history. And I think the same thing was done here with Aram and his symptoms that were consistent with autism spectrum disorder. This was excellent representation, and for me it was something that I could see myself if I have a patient with that diagnosis who is really into reading or really into fantasy, I could see myself recommending this to them because I think it would be nice to read a book and see themselves reflected in such a positive way. Marcus's character was kind of your prototypical best friend character. He was very loyal, he was very courageous, he cared a lot about Aram, and their friendship was obviously intended to be one of the building blocks of the series. What I didn't like as much about the character development here is that things seem to happen very quickly. And for a novel that is 1,000 pages, I felt like there was more room to take our time and more room for Spencer to really develop the budding friendship between Marcus and Aram. And at various points during the novel, there was time for her to expand on some of their challenges, on some of the trauma that they had endured. But it felt like we jumped very quickly from danger to danger. We jumped very quickly through our periods of character growth, and these characters who were really unknown to each other at the beginning of the novel became friends very fast. And although by the time I reached like the final third of the novel, I had been very invested in their friendship and I really believed that they cared for each other, it was at the beginning of the novel where I was told that they were going to be such good friends and that they really had this bond with each other that hadn't really been explored or expanded on, that I had a little bit of trouble seeing them as this great friendship duo. And to me, that cut down on some of the emotional resonance of the story. I didn't feel myself super invested in Aram or in Marcus until we got fairly fairly far along into the novel. There are really profound and impactful things that happen in that first 50 to 65% that didn't pull that emotion out in me because I felt like the characters hadn't been developed to the fullest. From there, we can talk about the plot a little bit. And like I said, this is more just like an overarching sense of the plot without any spoilers. So as I've mentioned before, Dragon Mage is quite a long novel. It's 1,000 pages and it was originally intended to be a standalone. And I don't often say this because I think that there is a tendency in adult fantasy to overindulge, but in Dragon Mage, I actually felt like there were many, many instances where I would have liked events expanded on. I genuinely believe that I would have loved this series if it were a trilogy. There are 3 pretty distinct arcs in this book, and I think that they would have worked really well as 3 separate novels. The characters go through some pretty significant events in their lives, and there are some challenges that they face together, and there are some that are very much individual or very isolated things that they go through. And I think that it would have been really nice for us to get more of a focus on them during this time. There are a couple of pretty big time skips in this novel. We start off with Aram and Marcus at age 12, and I believe when we end the novel, they're 16, it may be 17, but it's definitely a time skip of several years, and there is a period of the book that we kind of get to the end of a sentence, and then it says, and 4 years later. And so I think that we really could have delved further into the psychology of the characters. It could have created a lot of tension. It could have really heightened the stakes if we were able to follow the characters at these various points in time and see how their lives changed and how they developed and how their circumstances impacted them and forced them into certain roles. The final part of the novel that I want to talk a little bit about is the world building. Now, world building doesn't mean as much to me, I think, as it does to a lot of fantasy readers. I enjoy world building. I do not enjoy big info dumps of world building. I can really enjoy a novel if I'm just given a setting and some really complex characters to follow. I don't need to know all the mythology, all the history, but I know that some people do really enjoy that. And I think the world building here kind of falls middle of the road. M.L. Spencer does a great job of describing her magic system, which is a fairly soft magic system, and it is very powerful. But the kind of stop that she puts in place is that while there are individuals who can use magic in this world, there are also individuals who are called shields, and they are people who repel magic. And so people who use magic are often paired with these shields or people who repel magic so that they can have a fail-safe. To go up a really powerful sorcerer means that you would like to have an equally powerful shield who could protect you throughout those magical battles. And because magic is failing in the world above, there have been people who have found certain ways to farm or to mine magic almost. And these are really gruesome for one, but also really fascinating and something that I would have liked to see explored a little further. I'm not going to give any more details because I think it's really interesting to find this out for yourself, but I did like that aspect of the magic system, and I do wish that we had found out a little bit more about it. We're given a fairly concise overview of the history of the world above and the world below, a little bit through our bard character at the beginning of the novel, through some of the songs or stories that he tells, and then later in the novel we get to watch as our characters discover more about the history of the world and help unravel or unfold some of those unknown tales from the past that are really impacting what's happening in the present. There are a number of magical creatures that are introduced throughout this novel, dragons being my favorite of all of them, but there are also some magical horses that are revealed. Dragons are introduced a little bit later in the novel, and it was once they came into the picture that I really felt my interest starting to peak. But in terms of the magic, it is pretty soft. The world building, I think we kind of get we get a foundation or we get a skeleton of the world building. And I expect, because these books have been now changed to a series as opposed to a standalone, we will get more of that world building and more of that understanding of the world around our characters as the series progresses. So I know that not everything I talked about in this review was 100% positive, but I will say that in the end, I did have a really good time reading Dragon Mage. I struggled in the beginning, and if I was someone who DNF'd books, I may have DNF'd this within the first third because the writing style didn't really work for me. I felt like a lot of the character work was happening very quickly and not in the way that I enjoy. But it takes a lot for me to want to DNF something. I like finding out what happens, and I always am hopeful that they are going to be redeemed in the end. And for me, Dragon Mage was. It was a book that I really ended up enjoying. And I do have hope that as these novels progress, that I will enjoy them more and more. There are a lot of twists and turns in this book that I didn't see coming. Spencer kind of turns some of those common expectations and common tropes on their head. Our characters get into really tricky situations and don't immediately get out of them. Sometimes they have to suffer the consequences. A lot of the times they have to suffer the consequences of their actions, which I thought was really refreshing. So there are a lot of things to really like here, and this book has a ton of positive reviews. There are a bunch of people who really loved it. And so if you enjoy magical creatures in your books, if you enjoy strong fantasy friendships, if you don't mind a writing style that is less showing and more telling, then you may really enjoy this book. If I was going to give it a star rating, I would probably give it a 3, maybe a 3.5 stars out of 5. I, again, am really happy that I read this, and I hope that through watching this review, it might find more people that are interested in reading it and make its way to an even wider audience. I will say thank you to Patrick for recommending this book. I hope that everybody has a great day, and I'll see you again with another video soon. Bye.